Welcome back with a smiling face. Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. Whispers of Betrayal. Episode 3. Chapter 16. Julius pulled into the parking lot barely containing his excitement. He was really going to spend the entire day with his family. Marge had been just as excited when Julius explained everything the previous night and was all too happy to take his brother's workload for the day. Between the excitement of the previous night and anticipation for the day, he hardly slept, but he wasn't tired. Julius stepped out of his vehicle, straightening his maroon leather jacket. He dressed casually, black jeans and polo. Not wanting a repeat of the previous night, he stopped at a shopping mall for proper car seats and promptly had to ask a random lady in the parking lot how to install them into his car. Wounded pride aside, at least, he felt prepared for the day to come. Julius leaned against his car trying to keep himself calm when he heard excited shouts. "Mr. Jules!" Arya called, waving from the back seat of a Mercedes SUV. A smile immediately lit up his face and he walked toward them as Macy parked. There was no doubt in his mind his father was behind her transportation just as he was behind the villa. Part of him was irritated as those were things he should be providing them, but decided not to worry about it for now. Julius would settle with his father eventually. Today was about his family. Julius stepped up to the passenger side, opening Arya's door and helping her down. Caden released his own belt and scooted across the back seat to exit out the same door. Both Caden and Arya had a difficult time controlling their excitement when their mother said they would spend the day with him. Phase 4 was going very well. Julius smiled as the pair danced around him, eager for their outing. Though he often saw twins dressed identically, he noticed Macy never succumbed to the temptation. Today Caden wore khaki cargo pants and a blue sweater. Arya wore a denim jacket and jeans with a colorful shirt displaying the Eiffel Tower. Her hair was tamed with sparkly barrettes. Both looked ready for a full day of adventure. "Are you too excited?" Julius chuckled. "Yes." Arya bounced up and down, making her ponytail sway. "Mommy said you're taking us to the zoo." "That's right. We'll go wherever you two want." Circling to the back of the SUV, they found the hatch open and Macy fiddling with her camera equipment. Watching her, Julius recalled how she was always snapping photos even as a little girl. Most of the pictures of their vacations were actually taken by her. "So, what kind of appointment do you have?" Julius asked. He knew she had gone back to school for her degree. Though his father undoubtedly provided her many amenities, he also knew her pride. Macy could never let herself be idle. She wanted to work, liked to work and needed to provide for her children herself. It was the same mentality and work ethic her father instilled in her, the same ethic his father instilled in him. "I'm a photographer. I'm here to take pictures," Macy answered, hesitating and refusing to meet his gaze. Julius studied her, wondering why she always seemed shy in his presence. Where was the confidence she exuded when she slapped Catherine to defend her children? Or the feistiness when she threatened to knee her solicitor in the balls? Why did she seem insecure only in his presence? Even her attire at the moment was of a woman who knew herself and didn't need to put on airs. She wore mid-rise denim jeans, long-sleeved shirt, and denim vest. A silver hair clip tamed her hair and kept it out of her way. She was absolutely gorgeous, especially with the subtle blush on her cheeks. "I remember," Julius nodded, causing her to look up. "Every family function, vacation, gathering, birthday, and anniversary, you were always taking pictures. So you turned your passion into a living. Have I told you how amazing you are?" Macy's blush deepened and she looked away. She had been complimented before, but hearing it from Julius was somehow different. Was it because he had been so dismissive of her in the past? Or was it because he was the one person she always hoped to impress? She wasn't sure, but it felt good to hear nonetheless. Arya and Catelyn gazed at their mother with adoration. They had always known their mother was amazing, and it warmed their hearts to hear their father admitted it too. Whatever circumstances tore their parents apart, at least they were assured their father recognized how impressive their mother truly was. Unable to hold himself back, Julius stepped closer, pulling Macy into his embrace and kissing her temple. "I should have told you sooner. I should have told you every day we were together," Julius whispered before slowly releasing her and stepped back before he overwhelmed her. She sent him a look of gratitude. He saw a glint of her confidence return to her warm gaze. Julius smiled, happy to see her reaction. He liked to see her self-assured and strong. She should always feel that way, especially around him. "Are we going to the zoo now?" Arya asked after giving their parents ample time to stare into each other's eyes. For Phase 4 it was important to encourage their parents' interaction, but knowing their mother had never been actively pursued romantically, they didn't want her overwhelmed. Luckily their father seemed to understand and was being very gentle. There was no doubting the passion in his gaze. Arya wanted to clap and dance for joy but refrained. She and Catelyn had to keep cool heads if their plan was to work. Julius cleared his throat, remembering their audience, and said, "Yeah, let's go to the zoo so your mother work can in peace." "You two be good," Macy knelt, giving each a hug and a kiss. "Mommy, we're always good," Arya said. She chuckled, giving her daughter a tickle. "I'm serious now. I better not hear you've been up to your usual tricks." "Okay, Mommy. We promise," the pair said in unison. Satisfied, Macy stood grabbing her camera bag and closed the hatch. Her gaze met Julius's and she again felt shy. She wanted to encourage him to know their children, and she wanted them to know him. If she were being completely honest with herself, she wanted him to be a part of all of their lives again. "We'll be fine," Julius promised. "We're meeting back up for dinner, right?" "Right," Macy nodded, hesitating. "Oh wait, here. These are the keys to the villa in case the kids need something." It never ceased to amaze her how easily kids could get dirty. Thankfully Catelyn and Arya seemed better than most in that regard, especially Catelyn, who hated messes, but it was best to be prepared, and in her rush out the door she hadn't packed them a bag as she usually did. Julius took the keys with a nod and a confident smile she hoped he wouldn't regret before she turned and left them with a wave. Finally alone with the kids, Julius turned serious. "So what do you two want to do first? Do you want to see the gardens? Do you want to eat? Or, should we hit the zoo?" "Zoo?" He chuckled, taking each by the hand, saying, "The zoo it is." It was only a 5-minute drive to the zoo entrance, and the kids were practically bouncing in their seats the entire time. It had been years since Julius went to the zoo, not since Jude was a kid. He forgot how crowded it could be and how lively. The twins seemed to be perfectly at home among the roaming crowds. They showed no fear and stayed close, not letting go of his hands as the trio wandered the grounds. He took them to the sea lions first, as their pen was something of a central location and an easy checkpoint. Lifting up the twins, he held them so they could see the sea lions lounging on their rocks and playing in the water. Arya giggled at their antics while Catelyn craned his neck to see the ones underwater performing flips and cartwheels. From there he let the kids choose their destination from the signs posted around the different paths. Not surprisingly, they were eager to see the tigers. Following the paths, they reached Tiger Mountain in time to witness a training session with the keepers and one of the large male cats. They followed the paths toward Jungle World, where the fruit bats proved a surprising hit. Catelyn eagerly soaked in the information from the keepers about how bats used echolocation to navigate their environments. This was followed by a ride on the wild Asian monorail, which gave them a bird's-eye view of the larger animals freely roaming large areas. Eventually hunger won out and they took a break for hot dogs and ices, which fascinated the twins. The trio sat on a bench enjoying the slushy drinks that quickly dyed their tongues red and blue. "You've never had ices before?" Julius asked. "No. We've had granita, but not this," Cadden said. "Ah," Julius nodded, recalling the twins had grown up in Europe. Icy was definitely an American treat. It made him wonder what their life had been like, remembering how Arya spoke German so easily. "So do you both speak German?" "I know a little," Cadden shrugged. "Arya's better at it than me." "If you talked more you'd know how to speak more," Arya scoffed. Cadden scowled. Julius noticed that about his children. Arya was definitely more vocal and expressive, while her brother preferred to quietly observe everything around him. Even his smiles were usually just grins. Though he was reserved, Cadden's eyes were very expressive. It amazed Julius the twins had such different personalities, but he wouldn't change either. They were perfect the way they were. "I thought you lived in Paris." "We do," Arya answered. "Mommy travels a lot for work and we go with her. We've been to Barcelona, Milan, Venice, Amsterdam, Berlin, London, Dublin. We've been to a lot of places." Cadden quietly nodded. Their mother's various projects took her many places. When they didn't have school they traveled with her. This earned them many envious stares from their peers, most of whom never left Paris, let alone the country. Others scorned them because they only had their mother, whose work was unorthodox, but neither of the twins let that bother them. Their mother was the best person in the world. "Wow, you have been everywhere, impressive," Julius said. "So does that mean you speak French too?" "Yes sir," Arya rolled her eyes. Julius chuckled. His children were not bilingual, they were trilingual. Or at least Arya was, as Cadden stressed he didn't know German well. Would they never cease to amaze him? Suddenly his phone vibrated. Taking it out of his pocket he glanced at the text message. "Who is it?" Arya asked. "Your uncle." "Uncle March," she perked up. He wants to know how it's going. What should I tell him?" "How about we take a picture?" Arya suggested. "Mommy says a picture is worth 1,000 words." "Well, your mommy knows best," Julius chuckled, pulling Arya into his lap. Scooting Cadden closer, he held out his phone, snapping a picture of the trio on the bench with their ices. Once the twins gave thumbs up for the picture, he sent it to his brother, picturing the smile that was sure to grace March's face when he received it and no doubt pass it on to Rose. "Well, where shall we go next?" "Lions!" Arya shouted. "Giraffes!" Cadden said just as loudly. "Well, luckily those are on the same continent," Julius laughed. The zoo organized its animals according to origin, so animals that could be found on the same continent were generally located near each other. They headed to the African Plains exhibit next, as well as the gorilla forest, before pausing at the bug carousel and touring the butterfly garden. All proved to be big hits with ample photo opportunities. Julius was beginning to wonder if his phone would hold them all, but he kept snapping, not wanting to miss a moment. He was beginning to understand what motivated Macy while she took pictures during family vacations. They paused at the zoo shop for souvenirs before making the children's zoo their final stop. Both were excited to get close to the farm animals, even making friends with a curious alpaca. Julius heard alpacas could be temperamental, but this one seemed eager for attention. The twins giggled as it nuzzled them. Even though the twins were full of energy, it was getting late and Julius decided to call it a day. They still had dinner to prepare for after all. The twins expected him to take them to a restaurant, but he brought them to a grocery store instead. Grabbing a cart, he pushed it down the aisles with a twin on either side, as neither wanted to ride in the basket. "Are you going to cook?" Arya asked. You think I can't? Julius challenged. Arya gave him a sweet smile and earned a chuckle from him. Well, I have to admit I don't know much, but I know a few things. It's late, so how does chicken Alfredo sound? Yeah, the twins clapped, pleased their father knew his way around the kitchen. Grabbing the supplies he needed as he wasn't certain what was at the villa, Julius headed to the checkout. He handed the items to the twins and they placed them on the belt for the cashier. She smiled sweetly at the 5-year-olds. Are you shopping with your daddy? She asked by way of conversation. We're making mommy dinner, they proudly announced before Julius could correct her. The pride he felt at their endorsement was immeasurable. He hoped he lived up to their expectations. Paying the cashier, they headed back to the car and drove the short distance to the villa. Once their purchases were safely inside, Julius organized the pans he needed and got to work. Placing the twins on step stools, he had them assist where they could. Surprisingly, the twins seemed quite adept and he was certain they assisted their mother with similar tasks before. They had barely gotten started with noodles when Macy sent a text to his phone. Julius smiled at her inquiry of where to meet them. Winking at the kids, he replied for her to return to the villa before focusing on the task ahead. Chapter 17. Dinner was simmering when Macy arrived. He hadn't said he was cooking, so she assumed he ordered takeout until she found them in the kitchen. She set her bag down as the kids ran to greet her. Julius left his station to give her a peck on the cheek before escorting her to the table that was already set for 4. There was a colorful bouquet in the center and even a pair of lit candles. Mommy! We made dinner! Arya and Kaden announced. Made dinner? Macy's gaze traveled to the kitchen and the telltale signs they had been cooking rather than simply dressing up delivery. You really cooked? Of course. Julius slipped an arm around her waist and kissed her again. I'll admit it's been a while, so be generous. He held out her chair. Once he seated them, he served the meal with a flourish. Julius had considered champagne, but with the kids present he settled for sparkling grape juice. Watching their delighted faces as they ate the meal he provided warmed him as nothing before. He liked the feeling of providing for his family. After dinner he cleaned up, allowing Macy to relax and listen as the twins recounted their day at the zoo and showed off their souvenirs. Once he finished in the kitchen and joined them, the twins made him sit at the coffee table so they could color together. Macy watched their interaction with a smile as she checked her emails and made plans for her next photo session. The kids had 8 weeks of summer vacation coming and she hoped to make good use of it while they had the freedom to travel. But now she was having second thoughts. Maybe the kids would prefer to spend more time with their father and family. She knew Augustus hoped they'd stay in the States, but the kids had friends and commitments in Europe, and so did she. For 6 years their life revolved around Paris. She couldn't just move them on a whim, could she? But maybe for the summer they could come back for a few weeks. All her original plans had been made before seeing Julius again. Macy knew seeing him again would be difficult, but she hadn't expected him to be so excited to see their children. It amazed her how easily he fell into the father role, but would he be able to maintain his enthusiasm? Having kids was so much more than zoo trips and playing games. It was also nursing colds and fighting to get them ready for school. Macy couldn't help her fears and insecurities, but watching him with the kids made her imagine what it would be like to have him always there. Quietly she pulled out her camera and snapped pictures while they were preoccupied wanting to capture the moment. Nearing bedtime, Macy prepared the twins' bath and again Julius helped them dress in their pajamas. Arya pestered him for a bedtime story, this time picked by Kaden, who went with Horton Hears a Who by Dr. Seuss. Julius gathered both in his lap to read. Macy snapped more pictures as unobtrusively as she could before putting away her camera to help get them to bed. Once the kids were tucked in, Macy closed the door and again found herself alone with Julius. Hesitating she said, "Thank you, for watching the kids." "You don't have to thank me for that." Julius watched her, his gaze burning with desire as he struggled to hold himself in check. "And thank you for dinner." "You don't have to thank me for that either." His arms slowly came around her and pulled her close as his lips found hers. All evening he wanted to kiss her and now he couldn't hold back. A simple peck on the cheek was not enough. The only way his day could have been better was if she had gone to the zoo with them. Her hands reached up cupping his neck as he deepened the kiss. He could feel it, her desire, as her body grinned against his. Hope she still wanted him as much as he wanted her filled his chest. Yet he still felt her reluctance while her mind and body warred with each other. Julius didn't know what he would do if her mind ultimately won and she rejected him. He didn't want to face the answer. Even now he could sense it as he slowly ended the kiss, still holding her closer. He had to leave before he pushed her too far. "I should go," he forced the words out, not releasing his embrace, waiting for her to push him away. "Or, you could stay," Macy whispered so low she might not have known she spoke aloud. Julius froze, not certain if he heard her correctly. Sucking in a breath, he cradled her face in his hands, staring into her eyes. He had to hear it again, "Macy." Her green eyes swirled with emotions, fear, insecurity, desire, need. Macy bit her lip, unsure if she dared repeat herself. What if he really didn't want her? What if this was just some sort of game? There was only one way to be sure. Barely breathing, she whispered, "Stay." His gaze softened and a smile crept onto his face. Leaning forward so their foreheads touched, he pulled her tight against him. Before he captured her mouth again, he whispered, "As you wish." Macy blushed at the quote from her favorite movie. He remembered. Her arms wrapped around his neck and he suddenly hoisted her off her feet and her legs encircled his waist. Carrying her to the master bedroom, he barely managed to kick the door closed before lowering her onto the bed. He trailed kisses down her neck as his hands worked their way under her shirt. Her back arched in response, wanting him closer. Fighting control, he peeled away her top, revealing her milky, fair skin and perky breasts. She always complained they were too small when compared to other women, but he loved the way they fit into his hands and mouth. Sitting up, Macy helped him out of his shirt and tugged at his pants, surprised by her own boldness. She had always been shy during their love-making, but there was a new sort of confidence in her body that drove him mad with need. Julius quickly stripped her of the barriers keeping her body from his, even as he kicked away the last of his clothes, lastly pulling out the clip tying her hair back so he could run his fingers through it freely. She moaned as he kissed down her neck. He was already hard for her, but he wanted to pleasure her first. He smiled against her throat, drawing out her pleasure. He hoarsely whispered, "Damn, Macy! Do you want me to use anything?" He was ready, but he didn't want her to fear the consequences of their first night together in 6 years. The thought of her carrying another of his children thrilled him, but she wasn't ready, not yet. There was time. No. I'm already on birth control," Macy moaned, her body still coming down from its peak. Her menstrual cycle had always been somewhat erratic, so she used birth control to even it out. His tongue darted into her mouth, twisting around hers. They caught their breath together. Julius captured her mouth, slowly pulling out of her and holding her close as he rolled onto his side. Her body quivered with the aftershocks of her pleasure. "Julius, shhh. Sleep beautiful, I love you." She muttered unintelligibly, but it was not clear if she heard him. "What the hell is this?" Catherine jolted awake as her father burst into her bedroom. She yanked off the padded eye cover and blinked at the bright light streaming through the open doorway. Her father tossed a magazine on her bed as her mother hurried into the room, startled by the loud shouts. "Honey, what is the matter?" "Daddy." Catherine asked. Explain that. Catherine picked up the magazine, discovering it was a tabloid called The Eagle. On the cover it declared trouble in paradise, and below it was an image of Catherine on the sidewalk after being thrown out of the Dallaire office building. In the corner it asked, "Who is Julius Dallaire's new woman?" Turn to page 6 for details. Shaking in anger, Catherine tore through the magazine to the correct page to see several photos of Julius and his mysterious redhead. There was a large photo of her in his arms, their lips pressed together. Another photo showed them waiting on the sidewalk for the valet as Julius placed his jacket over her shoulders, and yet another showed him helping her into his car. The article was full of speculation, but nowhere did it offer an answer. Who was this mysterious woman? Catherine's face burned with embarrassment as she saw the scenes that had played out in front of her the previous night. Somehow they even captured a photo of her as she watched Julius lavish attention on his new woman. "You want to explain this?" her father demanded. "We've been spending money like water on your wedding all because you said it was a sure thing." "Who is this woman?" I don't know. She showed up out of nowhere." "She just showed up," her father scoffed. "Does this look like she just showed up? 2 years he has barely touched you and yet he's all over her." "Daddy, it's not like that." "Really? What have I told you? The hotel is hemorrhaging money. We are bankrupt. If we want to avoid the streets, you need to marry someone rich. You said you had it taken care of." "It's all a mistake, Daddy," Catherine assured him. "I'll fix it. You better, or your entire family will be living under a bridge." Chapter 18. Early in the morning, Macy's bedroom door quietly swung open. 2 sets of eyes peered in to see their parents intimately entangled under the sheets. There was no trace of embarrassment even as one raised their mother's phone and snapped a picture before they quietly closed the door. Julius lazily stirred. Blinking, he found himself staring at a field of red hair. He smiled, recalling the previous night. Macy still snuggled close to him, her face nestled against his neck. Her soft breath fluttered against his chest. Silently he told himself it wasn't a dream. This was real. She was back in his arms. He would do anything to keep it that way. Macy stirred, shifting her hips, causing Julius to groan as they rolled against him. He could already feel himself stiffening. Macy sighed, shifting again. "Macy, sweetheart, you might want to stop that unless you want to finish this," Julius whispered, kissing her forehead. Her eyes fluttered open. She stared at him. At first he saw confusion, then surprise, and finally realization as she blushed. Julius chuckled, leaning over and kissing her. "You are beautiful in the morning." "You're biased." "Yes. I am." Macy relaxed as his fingers lightly traced the contour of her back. His body was always so warm she hardly needed blankets. It had been years since she felt so relaxed. Suddenly she stiffened and her eyes went wide with shock. "What time is it?" Julius raised his head to glimpse the clock. 7. "The kids." Macy pushed away, looking toward the door. Caden woke up at 6:30 every morning without fail, and though Arya complained, she was never far behind. "It's all right," Julius pulling her back to spoon her. "They're probably still asleep." "No. They are up," Macy insisted. "Well, I don't smell anything burning, so I think we're fine," Julius smiled. Macy stifled a laugh and slapped his arm, but there was no force in it. Julius chuckled. As much as he wanted to stay in bed, he knew they had to get up. He still had to drive home and change before he headed to work. Mentally he chastised himself for not being prepared, but how could he have known the night would end like it did? "Okay. Why don't you take a long, hot shower and I'll check on the Rugrats?" Julius kissed her shoulder. Are you sure? Of course. Besides, if I stay here while you freshen up, I won't be able to stop myself from joining you. Julius kissed her again before rolling out of bed. Macy averted her gaze, covering her face as it reddened with the image he evoked. Grabbing his pants, Julius briefly disappeared into the bathroom, emerging after he relieved himself and dressed. He grabbed his shirt and leaned over her, kissing her deeply. "Take your time," he whispered before leaving. Macy lay several minutes, calming her racing heart. How did he have such an effect over her after 6 years? She had to be crazy, and what was last night? How could she have lost her self-control so easily? Was she really just *X starved as Vicky loved to claim, or was there something more between them? Would it be wrong to hope for the latter? Her head muddled with contradictory thoughts, she forced herself out of bed and headed to the bathroom. She only intended to take a short shower, but the relaxing steam kept her in much longer. When she was done, her thoughts were just as muddled as before. Julius pulled on his shirt as he stepped down the hall. He paused at the kids' door to see it was open and their beds empty. Aria's bed covers had been recklessly tossed aside while Caden's was neatly made. Macy's motherly instincts were not wrong. Impressed, he continued to the living room to see them kneeling at the coffee table. Aria was quietly coloring with her hair a tangled mess. Caden tapped at his mother's laptop. His early morning hair sported a cowlick. "Good morning," Julius greeted. "Bonjour," Aria smiled. Now that her language skills were out in the open, she was happy to use them. "Are you too hungry?" Julius asked. "Yes." Aria gave a characteristically enthusiastic answer that made Julius chuckle. "So what do you normally have?" "Mommy usually makes oatmeal." "And do you like oatmeal?" Aria made a face and stuck out her tongue. Caden scowled. Their mother dressed it up with fruit, but it always tasted the same, and they weren't fond of the texture either. Julius chuckled. He hadn't liked oatmeal as a kid either. "How about French toast?" "What's that?" "You've never had French toast?" Julius looked from one to the other in surprise to see the same curious gazes. "Well, let's fix that right now." They trailed him to the kitchen and hopped onto their step stools as he dragged out a griddle and placed it over the stove burners. Grabbing a mixing bowl, he cracked several eggs into it, adding milk, a generous amount of cinnamon and vanilla before whisking the contents. Once mixed, he dipped bread in it, thoroughly coating both sides before laying them down on the now hot griddle. Aria and Caden watched the process in fascination. Their aunts Vicky and Dylan occasionally made them waffles, but they never saw this sort of preparation before. "Are you sure this is French?" Aria asked. Julius chuckled as he flipped the toast. "Probably not. I'm not sure how it got the name actually." Caden whispered in Aria's ear after a moment of thought. She nodded, saying, "It does sort of look like Pain Perdu." "What's that?" Julius asked. "It's French for lost bread," Caden explained. "They use stale bread to make it so it doesn't go to waste." "Ah, yeah, I can see that," Julius nodded. "This would be a good recipe for stale bread." "Okay, do you want maple syrup, honey, or fruit on your toast?" "Syrup," they both exclaimed, earning a chuckle from their father. "All right. Go sit at the table." Aria and Caden hurriedly climbed off their stools and dashed for the table. They watched him cut the toast and add a generous amount of syrup before bringing them their meal. He followed that with glasses of apple juice. They dug in immediately, enjoying the sweet breakfast their father made. "More please," they both exclaimed, holding out their plates when their first serving was done. Chuckling, Julius complied with second helpings, full of pride at how readily they enjoyed the meal he provided. He couldn't help but wonder if every day would start like this once he convinced Macy to stay. What smells so good?" Macy asked, emerging from the bedroom. Her hair was still damp from her shower and pinned back with barrettes. She wore similar mid-rise jeans as yesterday, this time topped with a turtleneck sweater that Julius was already mentally peeling off. French toast, the twins exclaimed at the same time. What about your oatmeal? Macy asked. She tried to provide them with the most nutritious meals she could, though Vicky claimed there was no joy in such food. It was vetoed, Julius said, handing her a plate with a stack of toast topped with honey, and kissed her temple. It's their vacation. Let them live it up. She sighed, but there was no denying their contented looks. It was fine for now, she supposed. The French toast did look good, and he even remembered to top hers with honey. Shit, Julius muttered, looking at his phone. What is it? Macy asked as she set her breakfast on the table. Something's happening at work. I have to get going. You can't stay and play with us? Arya asked. Afraid not, Peanut. Julius leaned over her and kissed the top of her head. How about I come back tonight? Yeah. Then we can cook for you, Arya announced. And you'll stay and play with us after? Absolutely, Julius smiled, circling the table to grab his jacket, tussling Caden's hair as he passed. Caden snickered. Usually he hated when others messed up his hair, but he didn't mind if it was his dad. Julius circled an arm around Macy's waist and kissed her temple again. He really wanted to kiss her like he had last night, but thought it best to keep it PG in front of the kids. See you tonight, he whispered. Macy managed a not fighting her fluttering heart. She was already looking forward to his return, wondering if he would spend the night again. Her body almost shuddered with anticipation. What was wrong with her? Okay, you two, let's finish breakfast and we'll get dressed. Macy sat down, finally ready to eat. Okay. After dressing in cargo pants and a t-shirt, Caden returned to the computer. Arya joined him a while later. She always took longer to get ready because of her unruly hair. Today she wore a flower skirt and rainbow leggings along with a black shirt. Like their mother, her hair was tamed with braids and barrettes. What you looking at? Arya asked, seeing her brother still on the laptop. Pictures of us and Daddy. Really? Arya eagerly joined him. Caden paged up to the top of the site. There he showed his sister pictures of their parents. In one, their parents were kissing, holding each other in a passionate embrace. In another, their father was giving their mother his coat. Arya happily giggled. Their parents were getting along so well. Her brother continued to page down to get to the pictures of them and their zoo trip. There were shots of them as they looked at the sea lions, the tigers, and gorillas, as well as petting the alpaca. There was even a picture of them on the bench with their ices. Those are really nice, Arya said. Can you save them? Aha, Caden nodded. He had already saved the files to the computer. What are you two looking at? Macy asked, seeing how engrossed they both were. Wide-eyed, the twins looked up, caught red-handed. They didn't realize their mother had returned to the living room. Caden looked to his sister, terrified, not knowing how to explain without revealing their plan. His sister, on the other hand, was always a fast thinker when put on the spot. We're looking at pictures of Mr. Jules, Arya answered truthfully. You're what? Macy circled around them to peer down at the computer screen. Biting her lip, she knelt, reading the article accompanying the pictures. There was nothing inherently wrong with the images themselves. They were actually rather sweet. The article was concerned with the identity of the children and why Julius Dallaire was with them. Julius was considered something of a playboy, so it was natural to wonder why he was suddenly babysitting children. Mr. Jules is very handsome, isn't he, Mommy? Arya prompted. Yes. He is, Macy sighed. What do you think about him? Do you think he's nice? He's really nice. And he's a good cook too. What about you, Kaden? It wasn't always easy to get him to speak with Arya around. She was far more excitable and vocal when expressing herself, so Macy learned to ask Kaden questions directly to get answers from him. I like him, Kaden said. Do you think I'm as handsome as he is? Yes, yes I do, Macy hugged him, reaching a decision. Do you know why? They shook their heads, not sure where their mother was going with her questions. Could it be possible she knew what they were up to? Well, it's because he's your father. Kaden and Arya shared a look. They weren't sure if they should admit they already knew or not. It seemed their mother was still unaware of their plans, so Arya decided to play it safe. Is he really our daddy? Arya asked. That's right, Macy nodded, waiting for their questions. Has he always been here? Arya asked, happy to oblige. Why doesn't he live in Paris too? Well. Chapter 19. Julius hurried to his car, forcing himself to leave his family. It was getting harder to leave them, not knowing if he would be allowed to return. His place was precarious and subject to Macy's whim. After last night it was clear she still desired him. Yet her reluctance only heightened how much he hurt her. Would she let him stay, fearing it might end badly again? He had to find some way to prove his intentions were true. Sitting in his car, he pulled out his phone, glancing at March's text message, "Call me as soon as you get this." Sighing, he hit the call button. It rang once before March answered, finally. "Where are you?" "I'm still at the villa. I made the kids French toast for breakfast." "So you spent the night at the villa?" "Yeah." "Really? So, what happened? Is that why you needed me to call you?" Julius ran a hand through his hair. He really didn't want to discuss this over the phone. "No. It's the board." "What about them?" "I guess some articles about you and Macy and the kids came out in the papers." "Shit. And they got pictures of you with the kids, and the board is panicking because they don't know who the children are. I fail to see how my life is any of their business." Our stocks dropped a couple points after the story broke. Our family founded this company, so our private lives are used to indicate the company's stability. You know as well as I do that the stocks dropped after Mom passed. Yeah. I get it. Julius glanced at the villa. The last thing he needed was for Macy to be dragged into this situation. She was only just letting him back into her life, he couldn't let this jeopardize that. "Okay, call a board meeting. I have to stop at my condo and then I'll be in to deal with them. I'll let Dad know." Julius sighed as he put away the phone. He looked to the villa again as he started his vehicle. A board meeting was annoying but ultimately harmless. At least it had better be. He was not going to let anyone interfere with his family. March knocked before entering his father's office. Augustus glanced at him as he signed the papers Stephen handed him. Without a word, March slumped in a chair and waited for his father to acknowledge him. "Did you finally get a hold of your brother?" Augustus asked. "Yeah." March nodded. "He's on his way in. He asked me to call a board meeting. I don't know what he's planning to tell them, but I assume he intends to put out the fire, or light a bigger one." Augustus grunted. "He spent the night at the villa apparently," March said. Augustus's mouth twitched before he could prevent it, but he managed to hold back a smile. It seemed his son was a man of his word, intent on seizing hold of this opportunity. Perhaps there was hope in convincing Macy to stay after all. "You know, those candids of him and the kids were actually pretty nice," March said. "You should contact the Eagle and see about buying them," Augustus agreed. I doubt they'd take the pictures down. I don't care if they do or not, I just think copies would be nice for the family album, Augustus answered. Right. Marge chuckled. The board was in a panic over a few pictures and his father wanted copies. He checked his watch. There was over an hour before the meeting, time enough to get some work done. Excusing himself, he retreated to his own office. Augustus leaned back in his seat looking at the door. Without a word, he took out his phone and called up the text message he received earlier that morning. In it was a picture of Julius and Macy asleep in each other's arms, and a brief message appeared under it: Phase 4 complete. He chuckled. His grandchildren were certainly audacious. Just what did they have planned for Phase 5? At precisely 11 o'clock the board gathered. They sat according to seniority, with the older members closer to the end the Dallaire patriarch and his sons occupied. Some of the senior members had been there since the company began. They knew Augustus Dallaire for decades and still feared his wrath. The younger members did not have such experiences and usually dealt with the younger, more amicable brothers. They had forgotten to fear their employers. Augustus thought it was overdue to remind them. The board fell silent as the door opened. Augustus entered without a glance at those already seated. He walked with dignity despite his cane and took his seat like a king ascending his throne. Marge entered a few moments later, taking his usual seat at his father's right. Neither Dallaire said a word as they waited for the one who called the meeting. Almost a full minute went by before Julius finally entered. He carried a pair of photo albums as well as magazines recently purchased from a newsstand. After a quick shower, he decided how he was going to respond to the board's challenge. Though he occasionally wore polo shirts to work today, he wore a suit, looking every bit the professional for this confrontation. "Stephen, stand by the door please," Julius glanced at his father's assistant. "No interruptions." With a nod, the older gentleman stepped out and remained in front of the door to ensure the meeting was not interrupted. A surprised look traveled through the board members. To their knowledge, Stephen had never obeyed anyone's directive except Augustus's before. Did this mean Julius was the acknowledged first heir over his brother? "It seems you all have too much time on your hands," Julius announced, glaring around the table. "So much so you have time to read the gossip columns." Julius opened a magazine to the spread depicting him and Macy together before tossing it into the middle of the table. The board members glanced at it sheepishly. None of them showed a look of surprise, which meant they were all aware of it. More than a few probably bought a copy. "Someone needs to explain how my private life is any of your business." A couple of board members looked to Augustus for guidance, but the stoic patriarch was playing on his phone and didn't seem interested in what happened in front of him. Marge stood and dragged the magazine toward him to read the article as if it were all news to him. Both were content to allow Julius free rein to handle the situation. "Well?" Julius demanded, his voice getting a hard edge as the silence continued. "Cat got your tongues." Finally one of the younger members cleared his throat. "You have to understand, Mr. Dallaire, your brother and your father are the founders and faces of the company. Investors look at you to determine if the company is stable." "Is that so? Then explain to me how me spending time, sober, with 2 children is less stable than my usual drinking binges."
Well, this is a family company," another spoke.
"They are worried that another family may take over," Julius snorted. "How long have you been at this company?"
5 years.
"And you?"
2 years.
"And you haven't bothered to learn anything about your employers? There are men in this room who have been here since this company's inception. They could tell you a thing or two. They could tell you about my marriage, for starters."
"Your marriage?"
Julius flipped open one of the photo albums to reveal images of his wedding, shoving it at the young board member who first spoke. 8 years ago, I married the most beautiful woman in the world. 6 years ago I made the biggest mistake of my life. We've been separated since. Tell me, does she look familiar to you?" The board member stared at the redhead in the wedding dress standing beside Julius. His eyes went to the magazine March continued to read, showing a redhead in Julius's arms. "They could almost be twins, unless... You mean the woman in those photos is your wife? Do you know how difficult it is to get your wife to fall back in love with you?" Julius asked. "It's damn difficult. Take it from me." "But the children, these children." Julius opened the other magazine and turned to the article about him and the twins, tossing it into the middle of the table. "You mean you don't see the resemblance?" He opened the album his father had given him, turning to a page showing Macy's very pregnant belly. Setting it on the wedding album, he asked the board member, "Well?" He flipped to another page with the babies in her arms. "How about now?" He flipped to the last page showing Augustus holding the twins. "Or now?" The startled members looked to Augustus, who had set aside his phone to stare enigmatically at them sometime during Julius's speech. His expression was calm. There was no trace of embarrassment or remorse in his face. "Sir." "What?" "I should be deprived of my grandchildren because my son was an idiot." The entire table fell silent. Even those who had been with the company 8 years ago had forgotten Julius's marriage. There had been a lot of rumors at the time. She had been well below his status, and many speculated whether she was even prepared to be the wife to such an important figure. She was only around for a couple years before she disappeared and the marriage seemingly dissolved. None questioned it at the time, but now it seemed the Dallaire patriarch had been deliberately hiding her and his grandchildren from public scrutiny. "I'm going to make this very simple," Julius said. "If the board insists, I will submit paternity tests to satisfy them, at a later date and at my discretion. Until then, my father's word should be more than enough to satisfy you. But I will not tolerate interference in my personal life. You will not approach my wife or children. You will not make any formal statements or press releases. I will decide when and where I make any announcements. Do I make myself clear?" He fixed each of them with a glare, daring them to protest. They quailed under his ruthless gaze, realizing they had grown too complacent. They had forgotten how dangerous it was to cross a Dallaire. "You really should be grateful," March chuckled. "Until now my son has been the only heir. Now this company has 3. How is that for a stable future?" The board members shared looks at that statement. It was true. Though other families were often torn apart by infighting and rivalries, the Dallaires had always been close. Despite the age gap between the brothers, March and Julius were a united front. There was every reason to believe the cousins would be just as close. It also meant future generations of the Dallaire family were all but guaranteed. "Now get out," Julius said, reclaiming his photo albums and magazines. "Not one word of this leaves this room." Chapter 20. Macy stared at her computer screen, lost in thought. Since revealing the truth about Julius, the kids went back to their usual activities. Arya was busy coloring and naming the subjects accordingly in different languages, while Kaden played piano. Neither seemed particularly shaken by the earth-shattering news their father was alive and well, let alone had been spending time with them. It made Macy wonder if perhaps Augustus had already let that one slip. She thought she should be mad at her father-in-law, but perhaps it was the natural course of action. Julius was his son after all. In truth, she wasn't particularly bothered. She always intended to tell the twins about their father, but could never find a good time. But now things were getting complicated. Macy always assumed Julius moved on with his life after she left. She never expected him to confess to looking for her even after all their years apart. She definitely wasn't expecting him to act so passionately. He seemed desperate to keep her at his side, or was that just her wishful thinking? She felt her face warm as she recalled their night together. He had always known how to touch her. There was no denying her body's reaction to him. No one else was ever able to draw so much out of her, but what did it mean for the future? She only intended to stay in the States through the kids' spring vacation, then return to Paris. What if the children wanted to stay with their father? Was it even possible to maintain a relationship across the Atlantic? It would be one thing if Julius simply wanted to be a father to the twins, which she was happy to facilitate. The kids could easily spend some of their vacations with him. Yet he also seemed to want Macy back. What was she going to do? Macy looked at her computer screen. She meant to check her emails but found herself reading the tabloid articles about her and the kids again. Aside from the fact they photographed the twins without permission, the photos themselves were quite nice. She couldn't help but smile at how natural Julius looked with the children, though perhaps she shouldn't be surprised. Macy recalled Julius had always been an attentive uncle, so it made sense fatherhood would be a natural fit for him. A knock at the door interrupted her silent contemplation. Closing her laptop, Macy stood and answered it to find Rose and Jude waiting. They smiled as soon as they saw her. "Aunt Macy," Jude greeted immediately, enveloping her in a hug. "Jude." Macy hugged him back. "It's good to see you. You're so tall. You need to stop growing." "Doesn't he though?" Rose laughed. Macy stepped back. Jude was the spitting image of his father. He could easily pass for a younger brother. She smiled at the young man she still saw as a 13-year-old. "How's school?" "Well, it's school," he shrugged. "It's boring. Dad says it gets more interesting later." "He's not wrong," Macy assured him. "It gets a lot better, but here's something your father won't tell you. Don't just take your classes. Go to school events. Meet people. Make some bad decisions. As long as it doesn't end in jail time or pregnancy, it's all part of the experience." Jude chuckled. That was definitely advice he hadn't received yet. Macy knew he would follow in his father's footsteps one day. He had always been driven by the desire to continue the family legacy. In fact, he was almost too responsible for a 19-year-old. He never once gave his parents trouble. There were never any late-night calls for bail or emergency assistance. Vicky would definitely make a few more inappropriate suggestions, but Macy left it at her own. "So what brings you here?" Macy asked. She doubted he had gotten kicked out of school, so he must have skipped classes to come visiting. "Mom sent me pictures of my cousins. I had to come and see them for myself. I mean, if that's all right." "Of course. Come inside. They'll be so excited." Macy ushered them in. As they entered, the piano playing that had been a constant background noise suddenly ceased. Reaching the living room, they found the twins at the coffee table waiting for their guests. Jude froze, staring at his little cousins for the first time. It was like looking in a time warp. They looked just like their parents in family photos from before he was born. "Arya, Caden, you remember your Aunt Rose? And this is your cousin Jude." "Hi," Arya said cheerily as she and her brother stood to meet him. "I'm Arya and this is Caden." "Hi, wow," Jude knelt. "You look just like your parents." "Thank you." Arya giggled and even Caden smiled. He liked the idea of resembling his father. Arya had always borne a strong resemblance to their mother while he only had her eyes. Knowing he looked like his father made him feel like he truly belonged. "What is in there?" Caden asked, noticing the large bag Jude carried. "Well, I bought some games you might like to play," Jude said, taking out Trouble trademark, Bananagrams trademark, and Yenga trademark, setting them on the coffee table. I really liked playing these when I was little. I also bought a kite if you want to fly it. How do you fly it? Arya asked, genuinely intrigued. They had seen others flying kites but had never done so themselves. You've never flown one? The twins shook their heads. Well, you're in for a treat. Jude knelt at the coffee table and with the twins' help cleared it off to make room to put the kite together. The twins watched fascinated. Rose chuckled, snapping photos with her phone while Macy did so with her camera. Both had the same idea of preserving every moment. When the kite was ready, Jude led them outside. Despite its small size, the yard was spacious. He worried there wouldn't be enough wind, but luckily the buildings around them seemed to channel it, giving them an ample breeze to try and fly the newly made kite. It took several attempts, running back and forth with the twins laughing at his antics. Jude nearly ran out of breath before he succeeded, to the twins' delight. They clapped excitedly when it finally stayed aloft. Kneeling, he encouraged the twins to stand close and take turns handling the string. Seeing their delight gave Jude a sense of pride. He now understood why his uncle had been so keen to teach him how to fly a kite when he was their age. "Hey Caden, level with me," Jude said, who was playing the piano when we first got here. Caden hesitated. "That was me." "Really? You play that well?" Caden shrugged. "Caden has a keyboard at home, but here Grandpa Gus got him a piano," Arya proudly added. "I got to say, that playing was amazing." "Thanks," Caden awkwardly smiled, though he did like the compliment. Rose and Macy watched from the patio, taking photos. Macy couldn't help but be amazed at how readily the twins warmed up to family members they never met before. In the past they were always reserved and even standoffish toward people they didn't know. She wondered if their attitude was due to an intuitive filial connection or their conscious desire to know their family. Of the few men Macy tried to date, most were turned off by a pair of toddlers. Yet those who tried to be friendly were met with hostility and disregarded by the twins. In fact, even their godfather Paul, one of Macy's closest college friends, was occasionally given the cold shoulder. She often wondered why they were sometimes welcoming and sometimes ignored the man they saw almost daily and was close enough to be considered an uncle, but she never asked. "Oh, Macy. I've been meaning to ask," Rose suddenly said. "Did you know Dad bought an art gallery?" "Did he?" Macy asked, hoping she sounded surprised. In truth, she had known 6 months ago he was planning to purchase the gallery, but she wasn't ready to admit the reason why. "It's just so strange. Aside from your father's paintings, he's never been interested in art, so why a gallery? And I don't know this artist either, M. Gray. I wonder if he's a veteran. Dad has a soft spot for veterans after all." Macy remained silent. "Anyway, he sent out invitations over a week ago for the gallery's grand opening. It's tomorrow night. And I just don't know what to think." "Well, it's art," Macy finally spoke. "It's best not to think too much on it." Rose chuckled. "I suppose. That is an excellent point. So are you going?" "Yeah. It sounds like quite the event," Macy answered, "even though large parties aren't really my thing, but it's for art, so, oh good," Rose breathed a sigh of relief. "Why?" "Oh, nothing. Forget I said anything." Macy looked at her curiously. Something was definitely weighing on Rose's mind, but she obviously didn't want to talk about. After a moment of thought, Macy let it go. Rose was not one for large, fancy parties either, though she always seemed to handle them well. After a while the twins tired of the kite, so they headed inside. Gathering around the coffee table, Jude taught them how to play Trouble trademark before he and his mother said their goodbyes. The twins seemed genuinely sad to see them go, but happy Jude left the kite and the games behind along with the promise to return and play again. In return they colored him pictures to take back to school. They didn't understand why their family was so fascinated by their pictures, but it was an easy gift to make them happy. "This is great," Jude said, looking at the pictures addressed to cousin Jude. "When you guys grow up to be artists like your mom, I'll have some of your very first pictures to brag to everyone." "That's so silly." Arya giggled, but she was pleased. So far their family was fulfilling their expectations splendidly. Chapter 21. Catherine sat in a cab chewing her nails as she waited across the street from the parking garage exit of the Dallaire corporate office. She tried the front entrance first, only to find security waiting to escort her out again. As much as she tried to protest and claim Julius kicking her out had only been a joke, security took his last orders seriously. Until Julius told them directly to ignore his last orders, she was barred from the building. Next she tried to enter through the parking area, knowing there had to be elevator access. Unfortunately, the parking garage had barred gates and only those with company keycards could access it. Denied twice, she had no choice but to sit and wait. The cab driver said nothing as they idled. Every minute the meter continued to run up, so it meant more money for him. Catherine ignored him as he worked his crossword puzzle. Her mind again recalled her father's scolding. She knew they were having difficulties with her father's hotels, but she hadn't expected they would soon be broke. Securing herself a husband and a comfortable life was even more imperative. If she wanted to maintain her lifestyle, she needed Julius at the altar. She twisted her 5-carat engagement ring she bought in anticipation of Julius's proposal. If only she could have gotten him back to her room 2 years ago. The Dallaires were a family fiercely loyal to their own. If she succeeded in becoming pregnant with Julius's child, they would have had no choice but to welcome her with open arms. The last 2 years had not gone without her trying, but Julius never succumbed to his drink again. In fact, the incident left him wary and he only accepted glasses directly from his servers, which made her suspect he might be suspicious of someone tampering with his drink in the past. She never dared to try the same trick again, and he remained cold and aloof toward her. Even when attending the same events, Julius never offered to pick her up or escort her inside. She always needed to find her own transportation. He never embraced her, never so much as kissed her cheek. When other men hit on her, he never leapt to defend her honor. Beside her lay a copy of the magazine her father threw at her with the images of the redhead in Julius's passionate embrace. How did she succeed when Catherine failed? It wasn't fair. Just who was she? Looking at it again, Catherine had the nagging suspicion she met the redhead before, but where? Turning her attention back to the window, she saw the parking gate rise and Julius's car pulled out onto the street. She tapped the divider, saying, "Follow him." The cab driver nodded, putting away his crossword. He followed the BMW at a discreet distance, though it was unlikely anyone would notice one random cab among the fleet that existed throughout the city. Catherine continued to fiddle with her hands. She needed a plan. Normally all she had to do was bat her eyes in the right direction and men lined up to fulfill her every desire. Julius proved a more difficult target. He seemed impervious to her usual charms. Never once had he taken her anywhere of his own volition. She had to practically drag him around to get him anywhere. She had yet to enjoy the jealous looks of other women as she entered a venue hanging on Julius's arm. They would be the talk of the town and on the front page of every gossip magazine if only she would get him to pay a little attention to her. There had to be a way to guilt him into being more attentive. Perhaps if she flirted with someone else? But she tried that before. Julius simply walked away and Catherine had to deal with a leech who didn't know when to leave her alone for the rest of the night. Perhaps she should have pretended to be pregnant, but she knew Augustus would demand a paternity test before he would concede to her. There had to be a way to salvage the situation. If only it weren't for the redhead, none of this would matter. Catherine looked at the magazine again, ready to scream as she recalled how Julius held the other woman, his arms wrapped around her, his hands caressing her body as his mouth devoured hers. Catherine never knew he could be like that. What did that woman possess Catherine didn't? As they drove across the Brooklyn Bridge, Catherine suddenly became aware of their surroundings. She tapped the partition, demanding, "Where are we going?" "I don't know, ma'am," the driver shrugged. "I'm just following the car like you told me to." Catherine huffed, watching the BMW in front of them. Though she had never been invited, she thought Julius's condo was in Brooklyn. Was she mistaken? Just where was he going? She started to pay more attention as they entered neighborhoods with lavish homes. Ahead of them, the BMW pulled into a driveway, parking in front of the garage door. The taxi parked across the street slightly ahead of the villa, where they still had a good view of the front. Catherine stared at the gorgeous home with a modern feel. It had a peaked roof with wide windows. Built higher than the street, the home was actually built over the garage, which was slightly lower than street level. Julius stepped out of his car, unbuttoning his coat. He walked to the back of his car as the trunk popped open, allowing him to grab a large duffel bag. Catherine watched, wondering why he brought a bag. Was this not his home? Julius walked up the front steps. The door suddenly burst open and a small, red-headed girl appeared. She threw her arms up and ran to him. Dropping his bag, Julius scooped her up, kissing her cheek. She squealed delight. Her brother followed, clutching Julius's leg with equal eagerness. He dropped to his knee to hug both in his arms. Catherine stared in silence. Kids? Why was he hugging kids? Why did they look so familiar? She finally realized the answer. They were the same kids she accosted at the party. The boy was the one she slapped when he talked back to her in front of the Dallaire patriarch. When the red-headed woman appeared in the doorway, Catherine connected the rest of the dots. It was the same woman who slapped her in retaliation for hitting the boy. Catherine's mouth dropped as Julius stood, pulling the redhead into his arms and kissing her as if it was the only thing he thought about all day. Her arms wrapped around him as the space between them disappeared. How could he kiss the woman who slapped her? Catherine had been the one publicly humiliated, so why was he holding her? Who was she? "Oh, she's back," the driver said, glancing up from his crossword to see why his client was so interested in the villa. "What?" Catherine jerked away from the window to look at him. "Do you know her?" "She's his wife." "Julius isn't married," Catherine scoffed. 6 years ago he was, the driver shrugged. "I don't know if many people remember though. I think there was a bunch of theories after she suddenly disappeared. Some even said he killed her. She looks fine to me. Looks like he missed her too." Catherine turned again to the villa. Julius bowed his head to nibble at the redhead's ear and kiss down her neck. Was that really the cold and distant man she knew? Since when did he become such an insatiable lover? And the kids? Now that she saw them together, there was a distinct resemblance between him, the redhead, and the children. Were they couldn't possibly be, were they actually his? Reluctantly letting the redhead go, Julius reclaimed his bag. Herding the children in front of him, he escorted them inside. Catherine stared at the closed door, her mind running circles. It was beginning to make sense, and her troubles were only getting worse. Why the kids called Augustus Grandpa, why Augustus did nothing when the redhead publicly humiliated Catherine, why he accompanied her to events, why Julius acted so attentive to her. "My shift is almost over, lady, you staying here?" the cab driver asked. "No. Let's go," Catherine said. "Take me back home." The driver shrugged. Putting the car into drive, he pulled away and headed back to where she originally flagged him down. Chapter 22. Daddy. Arya squealed as soon as she threw open the door. She ran toward him with her arms wide. Julius didn't hesitate to drop his bag and scooped her into his arms, blowing raspberries against her cheek. Arya giggled, hugging him tight. Dad. Caden followed her out the door. He ran forward to hug his father's leg. Caden was never one to be clingy, but now he desperately wanted the attention of the father he only just met. Julius patted the boy's head as their greeting finally clicked, and he asked, "What did you call me?" "Mommy said you're our daddy," Arya announced. "Is it okay to call you that?" Julius sucked in a breath before dropping to his knee to hug both of them. He was shaking, but his voice was husky and calm. "I would love for my babies to call me daddy." "Best gifts for your loved ones." They hugged him tight. Perhaps they had been waiting for this moment longer than even him. After all, most children are curious about their parents. It warmed him to know they wanted him in their lives despite being absent for so long. "Arya." "Caden. You know better than to open the door for strangers." Macy rushed to the door but stopped when she saw the trio on the doorstep. "It's okay, Mommy," Arya said happily. "Daddy's home." Macy's face reddened, but Julius chuckled. Standing, he stepped up to her, pulling her into his arms. Capturing his mouth, he kissed her long and slow, savoring her taste. Her arms hesitantly circled him, holding him close and prolonging their kiss. He bowed his head to nibble her ear and whispered, "You heard her, Daddy's home." Macy blushed, leaning against him to hide her embarrassment. His embrace tightened, keeping her close lest she tried to escape. Her body felt so good against his. It took everything he had not to start stripping her right then and there so he could touch her skin. "Daddy, are we going to stay here all night?" Arya asked. "Dinner will burn," Caden complained. Julius chuckled, finally releasing Macy and allowing her to retreat inside. He reclaimed his bag and herded the children in ahead of him. He was already imagining what it would be like to return home like this every night, to be greeted by his children, and his beautiful wife. Macy returned to the kitchen, unwilling to face him again, while the kids circled him as he removed his shoes. Caden was the first to ask about the bag. "What's in there?" "Well, some of my clothes," Julius said. "Does that mean you're going to stay?" Arya bounced excitedly. "If your mom lets me." "She will," Arya said confidently. "You think so?" Julius studied his children's happy faces. "Aha," Caden agreed. "She missed you a lot." Julius swallowed back his eagerness, glancing at the woman making herself busy in the kitchen. His heartbeat echoed in his ears. With the way her body responded to him, he knew it couldn't be coincidence. She missed him. That had to mean her feelings hadn't completely cooled. If she had feelings for him, then there was hope. His mind went to the velvet-lined box he had grabbed from his desk and packed in his bag. He still had a chance. "Are you going to wear your suit all night?" Arya asked. "How about I change and then we can play a game before we eat?" "Yeah!" Arya and Caden cheered. Catherine pulled up across the street from the villa and parked. Julius's car remained in the driveway. She wasn't sure if she should be grateful for that or not. With a sigh, she picked up her phone and paged through the articles she managed to find. It took some time, but eventually she found an expose about Julius's wedding 8 years ago. Apparently it had been a private affair and media had not been invited, which was why only a few newspapers even covered the story. The images accompanying the articles were official wedding photos released by the Delaires. Julius stood smiling with his blushing bride. They were nearly 10 years younger in the photo, but she was definitely the same redhead. She really was his wife. Catherine would be lying if she said the redhead wasn't pretty in her mermaid-style gown with a sweatheart neckline. Catherine chewed her lip as she continued through the articles. The marriage didn't last long and she disappeared quietly after 2 years. As the cab driver said, there was plenty of speculation about the separation from the beginning since the Delaires made no official announcement. Apparently she had not been a socialite, in fact, her family had been quite poor. Rumors circulated about how she even managed to attract Julius's attention. Some claimed she purposely sought him out to entrap him in a marriage since she didn't have the social standing anywhere equal to his. Macy Grayson was the daughter of a painter and a nurse. Her father, Carl Grayson, was a Vietnam vet and his paintings always depicted soldiers. Somehow he managed to gain Augustus as a patron. Most speculated it was because Augustus himself was a veteran and was known to be a vocal supporter of other veterans that attracted him to Carl's work. Now that Catherine thought about it during her occasional visits to the Delaire estate, she had seen several paintings of soldiers scattered throughout the mansion. Could all of those paintings be Carl Grayson's work? Even without knowing the story behind them, she thought them distasteful and determined to burn them once she and Julius inherited the estate. Macy disappeared without a trace, so why was she suddenly back? And the children? They couldn't be more than 5, which meant Macy had been pregnant when she disappeared. Were they the reason she left? Catherine wasn't the only one speculating. She looked again at the recent articles of Julius and Macy and the kids. It wasn't the articles that caught her attention this time, but the comments posted underneath. Who is that woman with Julius Delaire? She's so hot. Man, the rich get all the goods. I thought he was engaged. Looks like everyone here forgot he was married. This comment was accompanied by an image of the wedding photo. Those kids are so cute. Are they related? Julius Delaire doesn't have kids. Are you nuts? Look at the boy. They're practically twins. Did he just pull these kids out of thin air? What is he, a magician? My God! Did all of you forget his marriage? If you saw his wife, you'd know that little girl looks exactly like her. Below the comment was a picture of Macy and Julius at an event sometime after their marriage. Wait, he was married? Oh, I remember now. He was married, but his wife disappeared like 5 years ago. Right. People thought he murdered her and she was buried under the Giants Stadium. Well, those kids are about 5. You know, his brother's wife had difficulty during her pregnancy, maybe Julius's wife did too. I mean, who wants to raise kids surrounded by all those cutthroat businessmen and harpies? So are they still married? I'm pretty sure they got a divorce. There is no way they are divorced. One does not kiss their ex like that. But he's supposed to be engaged to that blonde, what's her name? Engaged? Oh please. In her dreams maybe. Have you ever seen them out together anywhere that wasn't a public event? I mean, they don't even arrive together. Let's settle this right here and now. Who would you want to be seen with? Sophisticated and classy, a picture of Macy in her blue gown appeared, or trashy and cheap, a picture of Catherine desperately pulling down her cocktail dress after exiting the cab appeared. Choose wisely. Catherine's face flushed with embarrassment and she tossed her phone into the back seat. How dare they? She was a woman of means. The daughter of a well-respected family. How dare they compare her to a nobody? The nothing daughter of a talentless painter. She couldn't let this woman steal her future. Catherine climbed out of the car and headed across the street. She had a mind to march directly up to the front door and give that redhead a piece of her mind, but stopped short. What if Julius answered the door? Hesitating, she circled to the side of the villa. There she found a gate to the backyard, but it was locked. The backyard itself was surrounded by a tall stone wall capped with an iron wrought fence. Even the stone wall was above Catherine's height as she walked down the narrow alley. Finding metal trash cans, Catherine climbed on one. They added just enough height to allow her peek into the manicured backyard. She glimpsed a pool and a jacuzzi as well. As she silently fumed at the beauty of a home she deserved, the back door burst open and the twins ran out onto the patio. "Hurry, Caden! Before Daddy catches us!" The twins hurried down the patio steps. The girl turned right and ducked into the steps' shadow while her brother turned left and hid behind the odd shed that stood off to the side. Moments later Julius emerged. He had exchanged his suit for a pair of jeans and a maroon sweatshirt. Catherine nearly fell off her precarious perch. She never saw him in casual clothes before. She didn't even know he owned casual clothing. Julius descended the steps slowly before turning right and immediately snatched the girl from her hiding place. She squealed laughter as he tossed her into the air before catching her. He blew raspberries against her cheek and pretended to eat her by nibbling her neck. She giggled. "Stop it, Daddy!" He laughed, holding her tight. "Now where is your brother?" "Run, Caden! Run!" Arya called, warning not that it would help. There really weren't many hiding places beyond the bushes along the wall. Julius found Caden a few seconds later, scooped him up and also blew raspberries on his cheek, which made him giggle as much as his sister. Normally Caden did not like to be touched or held unless it was his mother or Aunt Vicky, but with his father he lowered his guard and welcomed the attention. "Well, I caught you, now what?" Julius chuckled, holding both of his children. "New game," the twins immediately declared. "Oh? And what's that?" Julius knelt, setting them on their feet. The twins shared a look before Arya shouted, "Get him!" Together they pushed their father, knocking him down before climbing on top of him to hold him down. Julius let out a shout, laughing before declaring, "Oh, you've done it now. It's time for your tickle monster." He circled his arms around them and immediately started tickling them. The pair screeched laughter, squirming to get away, but he held them fast. "Daddy! Stop! Not until you say I win," Julius said, continuing his tickle assault. "Dinner's ready," Macy declared from the door. "Come in and get cleaned up." Julius finally released the kids, letting them return to the patio. With a satisfied sigh he got to his feet and followed. Reaching the door, Macy chuckled as she brushed stray grass from his shirt. Without a word he pulled her into his embrace, kissing her. They stood forehead to forehead for a long moment before retreating inside. The door barely closed when Catherine's perch gave out and she tumbled to the concrete. She slowly picked herself up, rubbing her elbow. Wincing, she limped back to the street, leaving the garbage can and trash where it had fallen. Reaching her car, she slumped into the driver's seat. Who knew Julius had it in him to be so caring and loving? He certainly seemed to believe the children were his, and they even called him Daddy. Would it do her any good to throw suspicion by demanding paternity tests? What if they really were his? Could she somehow bribe the doctor to fake a negative test? Did her father have enough money? Would any doctor risk the Delaires' anger by doing so, even if she could afford it? What should she do? Chapter 23. "Look, Daddy! Clean hands!" Arya proudly declared as she and Caden returned from the bathroom. "Very good," he laughed, picking her up and carrying her to the table, which had been set much the same as the night before minus the candles. Even the bouquet remained as the centerpiece. "So what's for dinner?" "Lasagna," Macy said, bringing out the dish. "Come on, everyone, sit." The kids climbed into their seats as their mother served out their portions alongside steamed vegetables. Caden looked at his meal and then to his mother expectantly. Macy chuckled, bringing out a plate with a wedge of parmesan. She held the shredder over his lasagna and grated the cheese onto it. He smiled happily. Me too, Mommy, Arya declared. As Macy performed the same task for her, Julius recalled the scene from the restaurant when Cadden requested parmesan only to give his mother a disappointed scowl at the shaker. Was this the cheese he really wanted? Do you want some too, Daddy? Arya asked. Well, Julius glanced at Macy, wondering if she would repeat the task for him as lovingly as she did for their children. His answer came as she set the plate, cheese, and shredder within his reach before sitting down to her own meal. Apparently he would have to do it himself. The kids snickered at his expense, though he didn't really mind. They fell into comfortable silence as they ate. Macy's cooking was as amazing as he remembered. She often made dinner during the 2 years they were together, but he couldn't recall ever sincerely praising her efforts. Did I ever tell you, you are an amazing cook? Julius suddenly asked, looking at her. Macy looked up but didn't answer, perhaps trying to recall. Because you are an excellent cook. Julius grasped her hand, kissing it. Macy blushed, though he wasn't certain if it was from the compliment or the kiss. Arya and Cadden exchanged smiles while their parents were distracted. This was going quite well considering they were already into Phase 5, the last stage of their plan. This part was the trickiest as it relied on their father to make the boldest move yet. They felt he was ready, but they weren't so sure about their mother. Not only did their father have to make the move, but their mother needed to accept it. Macy, there is something I've wanted to ask you, Julius said. Arya and Cadden perked up to listen. It seems Dad purchased an art gallery and the grand opening is tomorrow night. Macy nodded, already aware but not wanting to admit what she knew. So would you like to go together? Julius asked and held his breath, waiting for her answer. Macy bit her lip. His gaze was sincere, almost pleading. Should she tell him the truth now? What would he think? Would he think less of her or more? In the end, she simply didn't have the courage. Sure. Yes, she finally said. We can go together. All of us. Yeah. Arya excitedly cheered. Initially she had been disappointed by her father's question but held it in. Going as a family meant they would be together the whole night. There was plenty of time to complete Phase 5. Cadden nodded in silent agreement. Julius let out the breath he was holding and kissed her hand. Thank you. So tomorrow we'll go shopping for party clothes, all right? Can we? Arya clapped excitedly. Arya, we already have party clothes, Macy shook her head. She had strived to teach the children to be frugal and not waste the gifts they were given. They certainly weren't poor, but that was no reason to be careless. But you already wore those dresses, Mommy. We should get something new. Arya. If we get something new, then we can match Daddy too. Arya declared. Now that is an idea, Julius smiled. What are you going to wear, Daddy? Cadden asked. Well, a suit. It's supposed to be black tie. Don't worry, Cadden, Macy assured him, knowing how much he hated restrictive formal wear. There isn't really a dress code. But I want to match Daddy, Cadden said. Arya always gets to match you. I want to match too. Macy bit her lip. Cadden had always despised formal attire, claiming it was uncomfortable. Yet he encouraged his mother and sister to wear pretty gowns. He never complained, but maybe the truth was he really did want someone he could match the same way his sister did. She felt Julius's grip tighten, drawing her attention. He watched her with the same sincere, pleading look. Julius wanted them to go as a family. Finally she conceded, all right. Okay. We'll go shopping tomorrow. Julius smiled, kissing her hand again while Arya clapped. His father warned him Macy didn't need him, and perhaps that was true, but he still hoped for, longed for, her to want him and to want everything he could provide. For now he would revel in the fact he would attend the event with his family by his side. And then the world would know how much this woman truly meant to him. In a warm and sultry forest far, far away, there once lived a mother fruit bat and her new baby, Arya and Catelyn cuddled up on either side of him as he read Stella La Luna by Janelle Cannon. Macy watched from the doorway. It had been years since the kids requested a bedtime story from her. She wondered if it was because they were bored or if this newfound interest was them wanting to create memories with their father. Macy felt a pain of guilt. Arya and Catelyn had never mentioned the desire for a father or questioned why he wasn't around. At first she thought it was because they weren't interested in one, but now she knew it was short-sighted for her to think that. How could they not wonder about their father when they saw other kids with theirs? There was only one reason they wouldn't ask about their father, and that was so they didn't upset her. Tucking the twins in bed, Macy pulled the door closed, her thoughts still churning. Julius hugged her from behind, pulling her close as he kissed the nape of her neck. Macy slowly relaxed as he held her body against his, rocking slightly side to side. He caressed her lazily, kissing down her neck. "Julius, tell me what you want, Macy," Julius whispered against her ear. "Do you want me to stop?" "No." "Good." He picked her up bridal style and carried her to the bedroom. Macy gasped, suddenly finding herself lifted in his arms. She didn't protest as he carried her to the bedroom where he finally set her on her feet. He held her close, his mouth finding hers as his hands roamed her curves. His lips pulled away long enough to pull her shirt over her head. He immediately pulled her back into his embrace, bowing his head to kiss her neck. His hands fiddled with and finally unhooked her bra. Macy tugged his shirt off, letting her hands run down his chest. Julius hummed, reveling in the feel of her hands. It had been so long since he allowed a woman to touch him. Every woman's touch made his skin crawl. Only hers made him quiver with need. Trailing kisses down her body, he pulled down her pants. She stepped out of them shivering, her face already flushed. Smiling, Julius guided her to the bed, laying her down and kissing her deeply. He nibbled her ear and kissed her neck, whispering, "Tell me you want this, Macy. Do you want this?" "Why, yes." "As you wish." Her body welcomed him, anticipating the pleasure he would give her. "Tell me what you want, Macy," he whispered huskily. I want you." "As you wish." They lay slowly, catching their breath as they came down together. Moaning, he eased out of her, kissing her lovingly as her body completely relaxed. Macy sighed, hardly aware he left the bed. He returned with a warm washcloth, gently cleaning her before rejoining her under the covers. Spooning her, he held her against him and fell into a satisfied sleep. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.